This is part 2 of my repair on this 62C deck. This is the one that came off of the X485, and the underside I sandblasted it and got it painted. I used a spare pulley or spindle that I had off of another deck. The other two I was able to get them working. So if I'd have bought new spindles from John Deere, they were $75. You can buy aftermarket for around $30. And if you want to replace the bearings, John Deere wanted $15 each, and you need 2 bearings, so you might as well just get an aftermarket. It's going to cost you about the same. So overall, that came out okay. I did have to do a little work on these pulleys. They were very loose, and what I did is I put a different axle in there, and I put some washers as spacers between them so they don't slop around. So those are in pretty decent shape. The wheels on this deck were actually in good shape. The only problem is the axles and inside the bushing in the wheel was totally worn and sloppy. So I did come up with a sleeve that I put over the existing axle, and I was able to then bore out the plastic wheel and get that to fit over that bushing. To do this, if I'd have bought new parts, would have been probably around $70 for a spindle, $30 for a wheel kit. So you're looking at close to $100 per wheel. There are 3 wheels that you would have to do that to. So right there is around $300. The other wheel on this back corner uses a different type of a mounting. And on this one, you wouldn't have to buy that axle. You can reuse this. So I just went ahead and this one was actually in good enough shape I didn't even need to do anything with it. The biggest problem on this deck was the gear case. The bushings that are in there were worn out, and so what I did is I had to make some bushings here, and I got sleeves and made them much heavier than what was in there. So these took me a little time to fabricate and figure out how to do it, but that was well worth my time. John Deere wanted $15 a piece for the bushings, and you need 4 of them, and they would have been too small. The deck had been on this mounting, the gear case had actually been wobbling, and it wore oblong like grooves into the mounting bracket. So using these, I was able to just go ahead and use the bushing, and I didn't really have to do anything else. I did replace the idlers, and this top idler, you need to take this plastic cap off, and underneath there's a snap ring and a washer. You take that off, and then you can take this off to get at this bolt so that you can put a new bolt in, put the idler on. But first you need to remove this spring, which it's not that hard. I used a pair of vice grips, and I was able to get that off fairly easy. When you reassemble this, the shaft in here on this pulley arm has 2 white little plastic bushings. Okay, there is no greaser on this, and I've seen a number of times where these bushings were just worn out and you had to replace those. So that's something I would always check, and I think John Deere wanted it was like $4 or $5 a piece for the bushings. A little tiny piece of plastic, $4 or $5. The pulley down here on the bottom is not that difficult to replace, except that when you do take it apart, there's like a little pedestal, washers, and some other pieces in there, and you want to just make sure you put it back together the way it came apart. A lot of times, and in this case, I even went back to John Deere parts and looked at it just to see, I wanted to make sure I did put it back together correctly. Replacing the spindles is not that hard. You take this large, it's a 15/16 nut off, and there are 4 smaller bolts. Then you take those out. Spindle comes out of the bottom. Then you just take and put the new one in, and bolt it down. You're ready to go. Then you put this nut back on. The problem is when you go to remove that nut, I have a 1/2 inch impact and it was a bear. I had to really beat the daylights out of it with the impact to get those off. So whenever I put anything like this back together, it's always going to get some anti-seize. You know, you tighten it down, and you know the anti-seize is going to be a lubricant, and it's going to prevent it from rusting, and it just makes it a lot easier if you have to do anything in the future. Okay, the serial number I can't really make out. I can get a couple digits. The problem is when you look at these axles for this adjusting mechanism, there are 3 different serial numbers depending on the mower deck that you have. The oldest deck that I have, this one, is always going to be the most expensive. So these are a little larger than the newer ones. So you have to be very careful if you do want to replace these to make sure you get the right ones. Also, there's a different mechanism for securing this rod. The newer ones have something that has like a strap with 2 bolts on it. This one has this little U-shaped bracket, and then it's, you know, welded to the deck. So you can get a pretty good indication whether you got an old deck or a new deck just by looking at this. This will tell you, you know, if you see this type of bracket, it's the older version. The newer version is not going to have that. It's going to have a plate and 2 little bolts on it. A couple rattle cans of John Deere yellow paint, and it looks actually halfway decent. Wasn't that big of a deal to clean it up. I have a flap disc on an angle grinder that I use, and you know, get that sanded down pretty good, and then depending, I might sandblast it, but in this case I was just able to take some wet dry paper, sandpaper, and got it smoothed off pretty good. And you know, it's just time consuming. It's like anything about this deck repair I've done. It was very time consuming. Getting things apart was my biggest problem. The bolts had never been out. They were like corroded, and very, very hard just to, you know, do some simple things on this deck. I will be making another video and showing how to put this new axle sleeve in here and then do a little work on this adjusting mechanism. It's something that it's just going to take me a little time, and I need to you know, put together another video so that I can have that online as a separate item, so if people want to see it, you know, they'll be able to just go look at that. So still working on the X485. Things are going pretty good there. I went after the deck first, and I've been concentrating on the X485, and it runs. I've traced down a lot of electrical problems, but I'm pretty happy with where I'm at on that one too. So that's all for now. Bye now.